Nick Hedley is a sustainable development researcher. He's been watching all of this play out. Nick, good afternoon to you. We're going to get to the integrated resource plan in a moment, but first, the Minister is right, isn't he, on the transmission issues. We always focus on generation. We always focus on how many megawatts are being produced here and how many megawatts are not being produced there. But if we can't move the electricity around the country, it doesn't help us.
Yeah, exactly. It's another one of those things that has sort of been neglected and only treated as a crisis once it's too late, which is the situation we're in now. So we're currently in a situation where the three Cape provinces, which have some of our best renewable energy resources, have zero capacity for new projects. And it takes a very long time to build out your transmission infrastructure, sometimes as long as 10 years. So this stuff should have been planned a long time ago. That said, there's still around 20 gigawatts worth of available grid capacity across the country. So what we'll probably see is projects starting to shift from the Cape provinces towards the sort of interior of the country and also KZN. While those areas aren't quite as good in terms of solar and wind resources, they're still really good in global terms.
Well, the sun shines in most places most of the day in South Africa. We're quite lucky with that. You've been looking at the integrated resource plan. It's basically the plan that will determine how government wants, where government wants our energy to come from over the next few years. You're very critical of the plan. Why? What do you believe it's got wrong?
Well, yeah, I'm just kind of passing on what the real experts have been saying. Over the past couple of years, and even in the previous version of the IRP, all of the main models in South Africa which kind of map out the optimal way forward based on what delivers a least cost mix and can be done the fastest to solve load shedding, basically. So those are models that are done by the state's very own research agency, the CSIR, also UCT, Boston Consulting Group, Business Unity South Africa, the NBI. There's a whole lot of models that have been done over the years, and they all come to the same conclusion about the best way forward. The previous version of the IRP kind of came to a similar conclusion, but this new version of the IRP has sort of taken a hard left turn and decided to scale back on sort of clean energy ambitions and instead go for a big shift to gas-fired power. So what it basically calls for is bringing on 40 gigawatts of new gas over the next couple of decades. That will take time. The IRP is also, in scaling back on solar and wind, it's also an admission of defeat. It's saying we're going to still be contending with load shedding all the way up until 2028 at best, and maybe even quite a long time after that. And that's partly because it's scaled back the ambition of what needs to be brought online in the next couple of years. So it's a big departure from what South Africa's main energy system modelers have been saying, and even the DMRE's previous plans, and very much at odds with kind of how the energy system is evolving globally.
There's a huge debate here and really around the world around renewable energy. Are other countries making plans that go in other directions? You suggest a left turn. Are they going right?
Yeah, we're kind of becoming a bit of an outlier. There are some that are going, some countries with really deep pockets like France and Korea that are mainly going towards nuclear, also with a strong wind and solar component as well though. But the majority of the world is going very aggressively towards wind and solar, and that's firstly because it started as a sort of response to the climate crisis, but it's now just become a response to the availability of new technologies, which are by far the cheapest sources of electricity the world's ever had access to. So the International Energy Agency's modeling based on government policies around the world and projects that are in the pipeline sees the world getting to 42% renewable electricity by 2028 and almost 50% by 2030. So the world's energy system is changing very fast. South Africa is going against the grain here, and according to models based on the new IRP, we'll get to about 22% renewables by 2030, whereas the rest of the world will be at about 50%. So we are falling behind, which will start to penalize our exporters who will start to have to pay really high carbon border taxes, and it will mean we'll pay elevated electricity tariffs because we are deviating from what's a least cost mix.
So in other words, it's not that we won't have electricity in the future, it's that we'll be spending too much money for it and producing it in a sort of old-fashioned way.
Exactly. But also the approach the new IRP takes is a slower rollout than the previous version. So the previous one, and what all the other main models in South Africa say, is we should be scaling up solar and wind very quickly now because those are by far the quickest new capacity you can bring online. So we could theoretically solve the power crisis in the next 2 years by bringing on a huge amount of solar and wind capacity, but instead the IRP scales that back and decides we should basically be taking longer to bring on the new capacity which we desperately need, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
So government makes these plans, the integrated resource plan, and there's sort of 2 points to make. The first is government has to do this. It is government's job to do this planning, and it is doing it. And I think, Nick, you'd probably agree with me that to an extent, no matter what it says in an IRP, there's going to be a huge fight about it. I think that's definitely going to happen. So those 2 points have now been made. But isn't government also kind of losing control of the whole situation in the first place? So look around you in any urban area, you're going to see a solar panel if you move more than a kilometre in one direction. You're going to see solar panels literally everywhere. The middle classes are doing it for themselves residentially. Companies, petrol stations are doing it for themselves as well. And that means that government doesn't have the power over electricity policy it used to have.
Yeah, and unfortunately this new energy plan is going to accelerate that trend. So households and businesses don't want expensive gas-fired electricity. And specifically any companies that are exporting, they want the cleanest power possible because if they don't, they're going to get penalized quite heavily when they export to the rest of the world. So what's happening now with this sort of doubling down on fossil fuels means that companies are just going to ditch the grid faster. And so are households, because it's going to take us longer to sort out the electricity crisis than it really should have. So what that's really going to do is accelerate defections from the grid. Companies and households that can afford to will invest in their own wind and solar and batteries, and possibly gas for backup as well. And the poor are basically going to be left to pick up this tab, which is being pushed further and further up by this sort of desire to launch a huge gas-fired power industry.
Nick Hedley, thank you. Sustainable development researcher, really do appreciate the time this afternoon. As I say, huge arguments here and around the world around electricity.